She didn't know his name. She didn't know his face. All she knew was that in 30 seconds, the man standing alone by the bar was going to be dead. And she was the only one in that glittering ballroom who saw it coming. So she did the only thing she could think of. She walked straight across the room, took his face in both hands, and kissed him like she meant it. In front of 500 witnesses, in front of cameras, in front of his own fiancée. What she didn't know, what nobody told her, was that she had just put her lips on the most dangerous man in New York City. Welcome, friends. If you're watching this, pull up a chair and stay until the end, because this story is going to go places you will not see coming. And when you're done, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The Harrington Grand had seen a lot of things in its 112 years of existence on Fifth Avenue. Debutante balls. Backroom political deals. One very quiet divorce finalized over martinis in the East Wing. But it had never seen anything quite like what happened on the night of October 14th, when a woman in a second-hand black dress walked into the most dangerous room in New York and changed the shape of her entire life in under 4 seconds. Mara Voss arrived at the Castellano-Sorano engagement gala at 8:17, 13 minutes late, which was deliberate. You never walked into a room like this first. You let the principals settle, let the champagne loosen the careful faces people wore at the door, and then you slipped in when everyone was already watching someone else. She'd learned that trick in her second year on the job, back when she still thought field work was glamorous. It wasn't. It was bad shoes and worse coffee and the particular exhaustion of pretending all day every day to be something you weren't. She checked her earpiece at the door. A habit, not a necessity, since the thing had been dead for 20 minutes. The van parked on 58th had lost the signal somewhere between the lobby fountain and the coat check, which meant she was running blind tonight. No handler, no backup frequency. Nothing but the fake name on her credentials and the floor plan she'd memorized on the cab ride over. Mara Voss, Event Coordinator, Pinnacle Planning Group. The badge said so. The business card said so. The entirely fictional LinkedIn profile her office had built over the last 3 weeks said so too. She took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, never champagne on a job, never, and started her first circuit of the room. The ballroom was everything you'd expect from two families trying to demonstrate that their merger was, above all, a statement of power. Crystal everywhere. Flowers that probably cost more per arrangement than Mara's monthly rent. The guest list was a careful construction, old money seated near the windows, new money near the bar, and somewhere in between, the people who had so much money that the distinction no longer applied to them. Those were the ones she watched most carefully. They were always the most dangerous because they'd stopped performing wealth a long time ago. They didn't need to. Her target for the evening wasn't a person. It was a conversation. Specifically, a conversation that was allegedly going to take place between a low-level financial manager named Grigor Ansel and someone from the Marcelli organization. Mara's employers, a name she kept deliberately vague even in her own mind, believed that Ansel was funneling money through the gala's charity auction into accounts that didn't officially exist. Her job was to get close enough to confirm the transfer without being made. Simple surveillance. In and out by 10. That was the plan. She was on her second circuit, angling toward the east end of the bar where Ansel was supposed to make contact, when she saw the woman. She almost missed her. That was the frightening part. Looking back, how close she came to just walking past, eyes forward, mission locked. The woman was standing near the champagne service station, partially screened by a floral arrangement that probably qualified as a small ecosystem. Mid-30s, dark hair swept up in the kind of style that looked effortless and cost a fortune. Pale green dress, rings on 3 fingers of her right hand. She was perfectly composed, the way a person is composed when they've been practicing composure since childhood. What drew Mara's eye wasn't the woman herself. It was what the woman's hands were doing. The left hand held a champagne flute. The right hand, held against her body, angled away from the room, hidden by the flower arrangement, was holding something small. Mara's brain processed it before her conscious mind caught up. A capsule, small enough to sit in a pinched thumb and forefinger, dark enough that it wouldn't show against a dark liquid. She watched the woman's fingers move. Practiced. Almost imperceptible. The capsule disappeared into a second champagne flute sitting on the serving tray beside her. Mara's chest went cold. She turned her head to follow the line of the woman's gaze across the ballroom, and there he was, a man standing alone near the far end of the bar, turned slightly away from the crowd, one hand in his jacket pocket. Tall, dark suit, the kind of stillness that didn't come from relaxation, but from something much more controlled. The stillness of a man who was always, on some level, ready to move. He wasn't talking to anyone. Nobody was talking to him either, but that wasn't because they'd overlooked him. It was because they were all maintaining a very careful, very deliberate distance. Mara had been in enough rooms to recognize what that kind of space meant. She looked back at the woman. A waiter was approaching the serving station. The doctored glass was already lifted and placed neatly onto his tray alongside two others. Mara's training kicked in before her fear did, which was probably the only reason she moved at all. The waiter was heading for the man at the bar. She had maybe 15 seconds, maybe less. Her earpiece was dead. She had no weapon. Event coordinators didn't carry, and she hadn't risked it tonight given the security at the door. She could try to intercept the waiter, knock the tray, cause a scene, but that would tip off the woman with the capsule and blow whatever she'd planned. And it would also blow Mara's cover so completely that she might as well hand-deliver her fake badge to the nearest exit. She ran through every option in the span of about 3 heartbeats. None of them were good. The waiter was 10 feet from the man at the bar. 8 feet. The man was already half-turning, the way people do when they sense someone approaching. Mara put her water glass down on a table, straightened her second-hand dress, and walked. She didn't run. Running in a ballroom caused the wrong kind of attention. She walked fast and deliberate, cutting through a gap in the crowd near the dance floor, angling so that she'd arrive at the bar at the same time as the waiter. Her heart was doing something unpleasant in her chest. Her hands were steady. She'd learned to make that split work years ago. Internal chaos, external control. It was the one skill she was genuinely proud of. The waiter arrived at the bar, extended the tray. The man's hand moved toward the champagne flute, the doctored one, of course, because of course it would be that one, and Mara crossed the last 6 feet of ballroom floor in a motion that was either very brave or very stupid, and she genuinely didn't know which. She stepped in front of the man, cutting off his reach. She turned to face him. She put both hands on the sides of his face, jaw sharp under her palms, the faint rasp of stubble. The absolute shock that went through his body at being touched without warning, and she kissed him. For 3 seconds, the entire room ceased to exist. His hands came up reflexively, not to push her away but to grip her arms, and she felt the strength in them, controlled and immediate, the grip of someone who had never been touched without calculating a response. He didn't kiss her back. He went very still instead, the way something dangerous goes still before it decides what to do next. And she kept her lips on his for 3 full seconds because she needed the waiter to move. She needed the moment to pass. She needed that glass to not reach his hand. She heard the tray rattle. She heard a sound, a soft, percussive crack, and knew without looking that the flute had gone over. She pulled back. The waiter was apologizing, crouching, the shattered glass on the marble floor between them, the doctored champagne spreading in a slow, dark stain. The man in front of her hadn't moved. His hands were still on her arms. His eyes, very dark, very still, the color of water over deep rock, were on her face. And there was something in them that wasn't surprise and wasn't anger. It was assessment. The cold, complete, almost clinical evaluation of a person who was very accustomed to determining in a matter of seconds whether the person in front of them was a threat. The ballroom had gone quiet in that particular way ballrooms go quiet when something unexpected happens and no one is quite sure whether to pretend they didn't see it. He said, in a voice low enough that it didn't carry past the two of them, "Would you like to explain what that was?" Not a question. The grammar was a question. The tone was a verdict waiting to be delivered. Mara kept her breathing even. Her hands dropped from his face. She was acutely aware that 500 people were watching them, that there were cameras, that somewhere across the room the woman in the pale green dress was watching too. "I missed you," Mara said, because it was the only line in the immediate vicinity that didn't sound like what it actually was. "I've been looking for you everywhere." The man looked at her for a long moment. You have never seen me before in your life, he said. No, she agreed quietly. I haven't. Something moved in his expression, just briefly. A shift, the way light shifts on water. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder, and he took her arm, not roughly, but with a firmness that made the distinction academic, and guided her away from the bar, away from the broken glass, away from the watching eyes of 500 people. She went with him because the alternative was worse. His name, she would learn in the next 48 hours, was Dante Marcelli. He was 39 years old. He had 3 known residences and 4 unknown ones. He had consolidated the northeastern territories of what law enforcement carefully called organized criminal enterprise by the time he was 32, and had spent the 7 years since operating with such careful precision that 3 separate federal investigations had collapsed for lack of anything that would stick. He donated to 4 children's hospitals. He read extensively. He was, by any reasonable measure, one of the most dangerous private individuals in the country. But Mara didn't know any of that yet. In the moment, she only knew the grip on her arm, the quiet fury radiating off him like heat, and the fact that she had absolutely no plan for what came next. He pulled her through a side corridor, past a startled catering staff member who took one look at Dante's face and found somewhere else to be. The corridor was narrow and fluorescent lit, and smelled of floor wax and flower stems, the working guts of the ballroom hidden behind all that crystal and candlelight. He stopped when they were far enough from the main room that the music was muffled, turned her to face him, and released her arm. Talk, he said. There was something wrong with your drink, she said. He watched her. The woman in the green dress, Mara continued. Near the East flower arrangement, she put something in one of the glasses on the tray. I watched her do it. She kept her voice level, reporting, not performing. I didn't have time to intercept the waiter, so I intercepted you. The silence stretched. She could hear her own heartbeat. The green dress, he repeated. Dark hair, rings on her right hand. She was watching you the entire time. Something happened to his face. Not a crack, exactly. More like the surface of something very contained registering a seismic event too deep to fully show. He looked past Mara's shoulder at the wall for a moment, and she had the strange sensation of watching a man rearrange his entire internal architecture in real time. That, he said very quietly, was Valentina Sorano. Mara processed that. The bride. The bride, he confirmed. She didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say. He looked at her then with an attention that was different from before, not the threat assessment of the initial 30 seconds, but something more considered. He took in the second-hand dress, the plain hair, the water glass she'd set down and never retrieved, the badge on her hip that said things about her that weren't true. You're not a party planner, he said. I have business cards that say otherwise. I don't care about your business cards. He took a step closer, not aggressive, but close enough that she could see the slight imperfection of his collar, the way the jacket sat on someone who was carrying tension in his shoulders. I've been to enough of these events to know what the actual planners look like. They're nervous. They have clipboards and earpieces, and they're always looking at the door. He paused. You were looking at the room. It's a nice room. You were conducting surveillance. The word landed between them, flat and precise, and Mara felt the conversation hinge. I was doing my job, she said, which was true and told him nothing. And what is your job? Event coordination, she said. He didn't smile. She didn't think he was the kind of man who smiled easily. You're going to have to do better than that. You're going to have to give me a reason to. That surprised him. She could see it. The very faint, very brief recalibration. He hadn't expected pushback. Men like him rarely did. I saved your life, she said. I'm not sure that entitles you to my resume. It entitles me, he said, to keep you in this building until I understand exactly who you are and who sent you. The implication settled over the room. Not a threat, technically. A statement of fact delivered in the same tone someone might use to describe weather. This was the thing, Mara thought. The thing about men who operated at his level. Violence wasn't a temperature they moved toward. It was just the temperature they already were. She made a calculation, not a comfortable one, not a I'm going to need to make a call, she said. No. I have people who will look for me. Then they'll look, he said, and they won't find you until I decide what to do with you. He moved toward the door at the end of the corridor, back toward the ballroom, and paused with his hand on the frame. Come. Or don't. But if you run, I'll know what you are. She stood in the fluorescent light of the back corridor for a moment, alone, listening to the muffled orchestra on the other side of the wall. Then she followed him. Back in the ballroom, the party had recovered from its brief, shocked pause and resumed the performance of celebration. The broken glass had been swept, the champagne had been mopped, a new tray was circulating, people were laughing, moving, glittering. The mechanism of the event had absorbed the disruption and continued. Valentina Serrano was standing near the windows, talking to two older women, a champagne flute in her hand. She was composed, beautiful, completely still, in that same expensive way from before. When she saw Dante re-enter the ballroom with Mara at his side, something moved across her face so quickly that Mara almost missed it. Almost. But she'd spent years watching people arrange their expressions into the shapes they needed, and she caught it in the half-second before Valentina rebuilt her smile. What she saw was hatred. Clean and cold and very old, the kind that had been living in someone's chest for a long time and had learned to dress itself up nicely. Dante crossed to his fiancée and spoke to her quietly. Mara couldn't hear what he said. She watched Valentina's face perform something like amusement, watched her reach up and touch Dante's arm in a gesture that was meant to look intimate and instead looked like a flag being planted in disputed territory. Dante's own security, Mara counted 4 of them, now that she was looking, had already closed in subtly around the perimeter. She noted the positions, noted the exits, noted that her options were contracting by the minute. A man appeared at her elbow, 50s, compact, gray at the temples. He had the specific kind of face that was designed to be forgettable, everything proportionate, nothing remarkable, and eyes that were paying very careful attention to her hands. Mr. Marcelli would like you to enjoy the party, he said, in a tone that made clear the statement was not an invitation. I'm Silas. I'll be keeping you company this evening. How thoughtful, Mara said. Silas smiled without warmth and handed her a glass of water. Somewhere across the ballroom, she watched Dante Marcelli greet his guests and press flesh and perform the rituals of the powerful, and not once, not a single time, did he look in Valentina's direction again. Mara stood in the glittering room with her water glass and her dead earpiece and her completely compromised cover story, and she thought, this was not what the job was supposed to be. This was something else entirely. This had become something that didn't have a name yet. By the time the gala ended, the kitchen staff had quietly sent the shattered champagne glass, or rather, the shards of it, to the private lab that handled such things for families like the Marcellis. The results came back in 40 minutes, because when you paid enough, urgency was a service. Silas delivered the report to Dante in the private car, in a folder, with no commentary of his own. Dante read it, set it down, looked out the window at Fifth Avenue scrolling past in the dark. Mara, sitting across from him in the car she had not been given a choice about entering, watched his face. Well? She said. He turned from the window. Cyanide compound, he said. Soluble. Tasteless at champagne concentrations. He looked at her with that same unreadable weight from the corridor. Fast. The car was quiet except for the city noise filtering through the glass. So, Mara said, and she hated herself slightly for the way her voice stayed steady when her hands wanted to shake. Do I get to know where we're going? Dante didn't look away. Somewhere safe, he said. Safe for who? He considered the question seriously, which she hadn't expected. I'm not sure yet, he said. The car moved uptown through the dark city, and Mara Voss looked at the man she had kissed to save his life and understood, with the particular clarity that only very bad situations produce, that she had crossed a line tonight that did not have a return path. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his world. She didn't know that the man across from her was already deciding, in that careful and methodical way of his, whether she was an asset or a liability, whether she was someone to protect or someone to eliminate. She didn't know that Valentina Serrano, still in the ballroom when they left, had watched the car pull away and made a phone call. She didn't know that the phone call went to a man named Silas Moretti. And she didn't know that Silas, sitting in the front seat of the very same car, was already listening. The penthouse sat on the 54th floor of a building that didn't advertise its address. No name on the lobby directory. No listing in the building registry that a civilian search would find. The elevator required a key card and a secondary code punched into a panel that looked like a thermostat until you knew what you were looking at, and Mara clocked all of it on the way up. The camera positions, the response lag on the elevator door, the way the single guard in the lobby had positioned himself so that his back was never fully to the entrance. Professionals, not showy. The kind of security that had been refined over time by people who'd learned what worked through consequences she didn't want to think about too carefully. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. No hallway, no buffer. Just the doors parting and the space beyond, vast, low-lit, the kind of interior that had been designed by someone with a genuine eye rather than just a budget. Dark wood, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides running the full width of the city, and New York spread out below them like a circuit board, lit and humming and indifferent to whatever was happening 54 floors above it. Mara stepped out. Silas was already there, moving ahead of her, comfortable in the space the way a person is comfortable in a place they know well. Dante came in behind her. The elevator closed. Nobody locked anything. They didn't need to. "Sit," Dante said. She didn't sit. She moved toward the windows instead because she needed a moment to map the room, and the windows gave her a reason to be moving without looking like she was doing inventory. Living area, kitchen off to the left, 2 hallways, one presumably bedrooms, one presumably offices or security. She counted the exits she could see, the elevator, a door near the kitchen that had the faint seam of a service entrance, and a stairwell indicator on the far wall that was probably locked from this side. "I said sit," Dante said from behind her. "I heard you," she said to the window. A pause. Then she heard him move to the sitting area, unhurried, deliberate, and lower himself into one of the chairs. He wasn't going to chase her across his own living room. That wasn't the kind of man he was. She turned around and sat on the edge of the couch across from him, not because he told her to, because she'd finished her inventory. Silas had positioned himself at the edge of the room, near the kitchen corridor. Quiet, watchful. His hands were loose at his sides in that particular way that meant his hands were never fully at his sides. Dante leaned forward with his forearms on his knees and looked at her. He'd removed his jacket at some point, she hadn't noticed when, and the shirt beneath was dark, the sleeves still buttoned. He looked like a man who had just come from a war briefing, not an engagement party. "Your name," he said. "I told you, Mara." "Your real name." "That is my real name." He studied her. "The badge is fake. The company doesn't exist. I had Silas run it in the car." He said it without heat, a simple factual correction. "So we can start from there, or we can spend time on things that don't matter. Your choice." Mara looked at Silas. Silas looked back at her with his forgettable face and his careful eyes. "The name is real," she said. "The company is a cover. The rest is complicated." "Uncomplicate it." "I work for people who wanted information on the gala. Financial transactions. Nothing involving you specifically." Nothing involving me," he repeated. "The target was a man named Gregor Ansel. Money movement through the auction component. That's all." Dante was quiet for a moment. "Ansel works 3 floors below this building," he said. "He's been on my payroll for 11 years. He let that land. So either you know that and you're lying about your target, or you don't know that, which means whoever sent you knows even less than you do about how this city works." Mara felt the floor shift slightly under the conversation, the way it does when you realize the map you've been using is wrong. "That's a problem," she said honestly. "For you," he said, "not for me." He stood up and moved to a cabinet near the far wall, opened it, poured 2 fingers of something dark into a glass. He didn't offer her one. He didn't drink it either, just held it, and she got the sense it was less about the drink and more about having something to do with his hands while he thought. "There are 3 possible explanations for tonight," he said, with his back partially to her. 1. You're telling the truth about Ansel. You stumbled onto the poisoning by accident, and you acted on instinct. 2. You're working for someone who wanted me dead, and this was a double play. Send someone to do it, then have that same person stop it to earn my trust. He paused. 3. You're working for someone who wanted me alive specifically, which means someone knew about Valentina's plan before tonight. The room was very quiet. Which of those 3 keeps you breathing, he said, turning back to look at her, is something I haven't decided yet. Mara held his gaze. The thing about fear, real fear, the functional kind, was that it needed to be metabolized fast or it became paralysis. She'd learned to run it through her system quickly, acknowledge it, and then set it aside like a tool she wasn't currently using. Option 1, she said, and I think you know it. I don't know anything about you. You know I moved toward the problem instead of away from it, in a room full of 500 people who all looked the other way. Something shifted in his face. Not much, not softness exactly, more like the recognition of a point he couldn't dispute without lying. What do you know about Valentina? He said. I know what her hands were doing, Mara said. I know what I saw. And I know that whatever she put in that glass, she didn't hesitate. Dante set his drink down on the cabinet. He didn't look at it again. How long has she been planning something like this? Mara asked, because the question was there and she was going to push while the door was open. That's not your concern. It kind of is, considering I'm the one who stopped it. You stopped it for your own reasons. My reasons, she said carefully, don't change the outcome. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he moved to the hallway, the one she'd clocked as bedrooms, and paused at the entrance. Silas will show you where you'll stay, he said. Your phone is already out of range. The service access is alarmed. If you're thinking about the stairwell, it requires a code that changes every 4 hours, and the current code is known to 3 people in this building. He didn't say it with pleasure, just precision. In the morning, we'll talk again. He walked down the hallway and didn't look back. Silas materialized at her elbow. This way, he said. The room was not a cell. That was almost worse. It was a proper guest room, well appointed, with a real bed and clean towels, and a window she could see through but not open. Sealed, she noted, from some renovation that wasn't accidental. The bathroom had a mirror and a lock on the inside that would hold for about 45 seconds against someone who meant it. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after Silas left, and she thought about the 11 years Dante had said Ansel had worked for him, and she thought about who had sent her here, and she thought about the fact that her earpiece had gone dead at a very particular and very convenient moment. She thought about Silas. She didn't sleep well. In the morning, the penthouse felt different, less like a theater set and more like a working environment. There were people she hadn't seen the night before. 2 men in the kitchen corridor moving with the economy of people who had routine tasks. A woman at a desk near the office hallway, working through documents with her coffee going cold beside her. The whole organism of the place was awake and functioning, and Mara walked out of the guest room and into it, feeling the precise vulnerability of being the only person in a system who didn't know the rules. Dante was in the kitchen, not sitting, not performing morning normalcy. Standing at the counter with a cup of coffee and a phone, he put face down the moment she entered. He was already dressed. She got the impression he'd been up for hours. There's coffee, he said. She poured herself a cup. It was very good coffee, which felt somehow offensive given the circumstances. The lab results came back with a full compound breakdown this morning, he said, without preamble. The capsule was designed to dissolve in approximately 90 seconds at champagne temperature. Symptomatic onset within 4 minutes. Cause of death would have presented as cardiac event. He watched her over his coffee. Nobody would have looked twice. How long has she had access to that kind of resource? Mara asked. The Serrano family has access to a great number of things, he said. That's why the engagement was politically useful. He said the last 2 words the way someone might describe an unpleasant but necessary medication. The merger of the 2 organizations was supposed to consolidate the northern corridors and eliminate a decade of friction. Instead, she tried to kill you. Instead, she tried to kill me, he agreed. Mara wrapped both hands around her cup. Which means either she acted alone and the Serrano family doesn't know about it yet, or the family sanctioned it, and the merger was always meant to end with you dead and your organization absorbed without negotiation. He looked at her. Those are your only two options, she said, and they require completely different responses. I know what my options are. I'm not suggesting you don't. The silence sat between them, different from the night before. Less hostile. Not comfortable, so nothing about this was comfortable, but more like two people who had established grudgingly that the other one was at least capable of thinking clearly. Then the door to the office hallway opened and Silas came in, and the temperature of the room changed. Mara felt it before she understood it. A kind of atmospheric shift, the way certain people carry weather with them. Silas was moving at a different pace than the morning before. Something clipped in his stride, and when his eyes came to Mara, they stayed there a fraction of a second longer than was natural. Valentina's family has made contact, he said to Dante. Dante set his cup down. And? They're calling it a misunderstanding. They want a meeting. Of course they do. Dante's voice was flat. What kind of misunderstanding do they think explains a cyanide compound? They're claiming Valentina was acting without authorization. The formal position is that she had a breakdown. Emotional instability from the pressure of the engagement. Silas paused. They're offering to remove her from any future negotiations and continue the merger discussions with a different representative. The quiet in the kitchen had a specific texture. Mara kept her face neutral and watched Dante's jaw. They want to continue, Dante said. That's their position. Their daughter tried to kill me at the engagement party and they want to continue. They're framing it as a family matter they're prepared to handle internally. Silas's voice carried no particular inflection, which was a choice, Mara thought, a very careful choice. Their argument is that the organizational alliance is too valuable to both sides to let one person's instability destroy it. Dante looked at the window. Below them, the city was doing its morning things, relentlessly ordinary. Tell them I need 48 hours, he said. Silas nodded and went back through the door. Mara watched the door close, then she looked at Dante. You're not going to take the meeting, she said. No. You're buying time. I'm assessing the situation. Which situation? The merger or the poisoning? He turned to look at her, and there was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not calculation, but something that sat under both of those things. Something tired. Both of them are the same situation, he said. They were always the same situation. I just didn't see it clearly enough. He walked past her toward the living room, then stopped with his back to her. You'll stay here today, he said. Not because I think you're a threat, because until I know who sent you and why Ansel's name was on your list, you're a variable I'm not releasing into the world. She could have argued. She chose not to, because she was thinking about Silas and about her dead earpiece, and about the 48 hours Dante had just bought, and she was beginning to believe that the most dangerous person in this penthouse was not the man who'd brought her here. The day moved in pieces. Mara was given access to the main living area, but not the office corridor. She ate the lunch that appeared at the kitchen counter without ceremony. She counted the guard rotations. She found a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, which she hadn't seen in a while, and read it cover to cover twice, not because she was interested in the content, but because it gave her something to look at while she watched the room. Silas came and went. He was always doing something purposeful, always in motion, but the motion never quite lined up with the urgency he carried. She watched the way he spoke to the other staff. Brief, directive, never unkind but never warm. The way he moved through the apartment like he knew it by memory. She thought, how long have you been here, Silas Moretti, and how many of the rooms in this place do you know better than the man who owns it? Late afternoon, Dante came out of the office corridor with his jacket back on and something different in his posture, tightened, realigned, the way a person looks when they've made a decision they're not entirely at peace with. I'm going out, he said to the room in general. Silas appeared immediately, which told Mara he'd been close enough to hear. I'll have the car brought around. I'll take the secondary vehicle. Lena drives. Dante looked at Silas. You stay here. Something moved in Silas's face, fast and controlled, but she caught it. The security protocols. Lena knows the protocols, Dante said, and the mildness in his voice was not mild at all. Stay here. He looked at Mara then, just briefly. She didn't know what it meant. She filed it. Silas stayed. The apartment breathed differently without Dante in it. For an hour, Silas worked at the desk near the office corridor, and Mara sat in the living room with her newspaper, and they maintained the polite fiction of two people who had no particular feelings about each other's existence. Then Silas got up to take a call. Stepping toward the far end of the living room, his back to her, his voice dropping to a register she couldn't resolve from where she sat. She didn't move. She watched the reflection in the window glass. She couldn't hear words. She could hear cadence. The call was not like the calls she'd watched him make to the staff. Those were short, directive, closed. This call was longer. There were pauses, as if he was listening to something extensive and complex. And there was, in the set of his shoulders, a posture she recognized. The posture of someone who was reporting in. She kept her eyes on the newspaper. She turned a page at a natural pace. When Silas came back to the desk, his walk was the same as always. His face was the same. The only difference was that he glanced at her as he sat down, checking on the location of the variable, and she held his gaze with the comfortable blankness of someone who had learned, a long time ago, how to look bored on command. She thought, "You didn't freeze the earpiece to protect this operation. You froze it to protect yours." She thought, Gregor Ansell's name was on my list because someone wanted me here. And the someone who wanted me here knew I'd be useful once I arrived. She thought about Valentina Serrano, who had tried to kill Dante with a cyanide capsule at her own engagement party. A woman who had been humiliated publicly. A woman who, according to Dante, had sat across from him at negotiating tables for the better part of a year while an alliance was constructed around them both. A woman who didn't seem, from what Mara had observed in those few seconds at the gala, like someone acting from emotional breakdown. She seemed like someone acting from information. Who had told Valentina that tonight was the night? Who had known the seating arrangements, the server routes, the moment Dante would stand alone at the bar long enough to receive a glass of doctored champagne? Someone who moved through this apartment like he owned it. Someone who was looking at her right now over the top of a report he was pretending to read. Silas met her eyes across the room and smiled slightly, and it was the most frightening thing Mara had seen in 48 hours, which was saying something. "You're thinking very hard about something," he said. "Just reading," she said. "Of course." He returned to his report. Mara turned another page. It was not until 7 in the evening, when Dante returned and Silas excused himself to his own rooms, that Mara got 30 seconds alone with Dante in the kitchen, and she spent them carefully. "The call Silas took this afternoon," she said quietly, without preamble. "Did you know about it?" Dante's eyes sharpened immediately. "What call?" 45 minutes after you left. He took it near the window, stepped away from the desk, turned away from me. Long. He was listening, not talking, and when he came back, he checked where I was before he sat down. Dante was very still. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," she said. "I'm describing what I saw. What you do with it is your decision." He looked at her for a long moment. His hands were flat on the counter. She could see the deliberate control in them. "People make calls," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "And certain kinds of people make certain kinds of calls and check the room afterward." The silence stretched. "I could be wrong," she said. "I probably am wrong. I'm a stranger in your house with reasons to cause problems." She held his gaze. "But I wasn't wrong about Valentina." Dante turned away from her and looked out the kitchen window at the darkening city. She watched the muscles in his jaw work. "Go back to your room," he said. She went. She lay in the dark of the sealed window guest room and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the ways she had made her situation worse tonight by saying what she'd said, and the single way in which she might have made it better. And she couldn't calculate which outweighed the other. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hall. Not the regular rotation, off-cycle, unhurried, 2 sets. She heard a door close. Then voices, too low to distinguish through the wall. She got up and stood near the door of her room without touching the handle, listening to the texture of what she couldn't hear, trying to build a picture from the shape of the silence. Then a single sharp sound. Something struck against something else, hard, the universal language of an argument crossing a line. And then nothing. Then footsteps again. One set, moving away. She pressed her back to the wall beside the door and breathed slowly and waited for her heart rate to come down to something manageable. In the morning, she found out. Not from Dante. From the absence of Silas at breakfast, and from the way the woman at the office desk didn't look up when Mara came into the kitchen, and from the two men she didn't recognize standing at the end of the office corridor, and from the fact that when Dante appeared, he looked like a man who had been awake all night making very cold decisions. He poured coffee, set a cup in front of her without asking. Silas has been managing communications with the Serrano family for the last 4 months, he said, without sitting down. Directly, without my knowledge. He wrapped both hands around his cup. He knew about Valentina's plan. He didn't stop it. A pause. He didn't stop it because if it succeeded, the organizational transition would have moved through him. The kitchen was very quiet. He used Valentina, Mara said. He armed her, Dante said, gave her the compound, gave her the access, convinced her that moving against me would free her from an alliance she'd been used to forge. His voice was controlled in the way that things under enormous pressure are controlled, held together by structure, not by ease. She believed she was acting for herself. Mara thought about the hatred she'd seen move across Valentina's face for that half second in the ballroom, clean and cold and practiced. "Where's he now?" she asked. Dante looked at her. "Not here." "Did he—" "He's alive," Dante said. "For the moment. Because before I do anything permanent, I need to understand exactly how far this goes. Who he's been talking to, what was promised, and to whom." He set his cup down with a precision that was almost gentle. "And I need to understand why your name was on a list that appeared in Silas's communication files from 6 weeks ago." The floor went out from under the conversation. Mara looked at him steadily. "My name. Your cover name. Mara Voss, event coordinator. It appears in a message Silas sent to an external address." He watched her the way he'd watched her in the corridor at the gala, that complete, unsparing assessment. "So before I decide what you are to me, I need you to tell me who built your legend, who created the Mara Voss identity, because someone gave that name to Silas Moretti 6 weeks before you walked into that ballroom." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Mara's hands were still on the counter. Inside her chest, something had shifted. The cold recognition that the betrayal she'd suspected in Silas ran deeper than one man's ambition, that it had a longer reach, that it had touched the people who had sent her here before she'd ever arrived. She thought about the dead earpiece. She thought about Ansel's name on her list. She thought about the particular horrible elegance of a plan that needed a witness at the ballroom. Not to stop the poisoning, but to be seen stopping it. To establish trust. To become the variable inside Dante's walls. She looked at Dante Marcelli across the kitchen counter, and she understood, with the terrible clarity of someone who has just understood something too late to matter, that she had not stumbled into this situation. She had been placed in it. And whoever had placed her here was still outside these walls, waiting to see what she would do next. "I need you to listen to me," she said, "and I need you not to decide anything for the next 3 minutes." Dante's eyes didn't move from her face. "Someone used me," she said, "the same way they used Valentina. I don't know who yet, but I think—" She stopped, started again. "I think whoever built my legend and gave it to Silas is the same person who told Silas to let Valentina move against you. And I think the reason I'm standing in your kitchen right now isn't because I made a choice at a party." She felt her voice remain steady through sheer stubbornness. "It's because someone needed me to be here. Someone who needs access to you, through me." Dante was absolutely still. "And I think," she said, "that whoever that someone is, they're going to make their next move in the next 48 hours. Because Silas is gone, the plan has been disrupted, and disrupted plans don't—" The phone on the counter lit up. Dante looked at it. Then he looked at her. He picked it up, read whatever was on the screen, and the expression that moved across his face was the first one she'd seen that she couldn't read at all. Not anger, not calculation, not that particular tired thing from before, something she didn't have a name for. He turned the phone so she could see the screen. It was a photograph. A parking structure, a black car, driver's door open, a figure on the ground beside it. Lena. The driver who had taken Dante out the previous evening. The one Dante had chosen over Silas. Below the photograph, a single line of text. You have 12 hours to release Silas Moretti. After that, we start returning pieces. Dante set the phone face down on the counter with the same deliberate precision he used for everything, and the sound it made against the marble was very small and very final, and nobody in the kitchen said anything for a long moment. Mara looked at the blank back of the phone. She looked at Dante's hand still flat on the counter and thought about the driver, Lena, who had been chosen specifically because she wasn't Silas, and who was now on the ground in a parking structure because of exactly that reason. The logic of it was clean and horrible. You removed the man I trusted, so I removed someone you trusted. This is what the next 12 hours look like. How many people know where Silas is right now? She said. 4, Dante said. Can you trust all 4? He looked at her. The question didn't need an answer, or the answer was in the look, which was that 48 hours ago he would have said yes without hesitation, and now that number had collapsed to something he was actively recalculating. 3, he said. Maybe. He picked the phone back up, made a call, 2 words, hung up. Then he walked out of the kitchen toward the office corridor, and Mara followed him without being invited, and he didn't tell her not to, which she took as the only permission she was going to get. The office was smaller than she'd expected, functional. 2 screens on a standing desk, a board on the wall with photographs and names connected by lines that meant things she didn't have context for yet. 2 of the men she'd seen in the corridor were already in here, and a third she hadn't seen before. Young, sharp-eyed, a laptop open in front of him on the secondary desk. Pull the parking structure, Dante said to the young one. Every camera in a 4-block radius. I want vehicle plates and timestamps from the last 2 hours. The young man was already typing. Dante turned to the board on the wall. He stood in front of it for a moment, and Mara stood behind him and looked at it too, and she began to read the architecture of what she was looking at. Names clustered in groups, lines of connection marked in different colors she was inferring the meaning of, photographs that ranged from candid surveillance quality to formal, the kind of images that come from official documentation. She found Silas's photograph near the center of the board. A red line connected him to Dante's name at the top. A second red line, newer, the marker ink slightly different, now connected him to a cluster on the left side she didn't recognize. She found Valentina's photograph, found the Serrano family cluster, found the lines of the intended merger spreading outward like something that had looked like a web and turned out to be a trap. She was looking for her own name when Dante said, without turning around, "You won't find yourself on there yet." "Yet," she said. "The board gets updated when I have complete information." He turned then, looked at her with the particular quality of attention she'd been on the receiving end of since the ballroom, that complete, unsparing regard. "Tell me about your handler." "I operate through a cutout. I don't have direct contact with the people who assign work." "Name of the cutout." She hesitated, not because she was protecting anyone, she was past that, but because she was measuring what the name would mean to him and whether his reaction would tell her something. "He goes by Carver," she said. "I've never had a physical meeting. Phone contact only. The assignments come through a secure messaging system that I was told was independently maintained." Dante was watching her face. "Told by whom?" he said. "By Carver." The silence that followed had a specific weight. One of the men by the door shifted his stance. The young man at the laptop stopped typing for a second, then resumed. "Carver," Dante said, not to her, to the room. One of the men by the door said quietly, "I'll run it." Dante nodded. The man left. He looked back at Mara. "I want to show you something," he said, "and I want you to understand that I'm showing you this because the alternative where I don't show you, and I don't know which way you'll move, is a risk I can't hold for 12 hours. He reached past her to the laptop the young man was using, angled it, pulled up a document that had been minimized. A message thread. He scrolled to a specific point and turned the screen toward her. She read it. She read it again. The messages were between 2 addresses she didn't recognize. The content was operational, timelines, cover identities, movement schedules. The kind of thing she'd exchanged herself, in different windows with different addresses. The language was familiar the way a nightmare is familiar. All the right shapes in all the wrong places. Her name was in there. Her actual name, not the legend. Mara Voss, and beneath it, in a message from 6 weeks prior. Asset has no organizational affiliation awareness. Will proceed as directed. Exfil unnecessary. She won't survive contact. She read that last clause twice. She felt the cold move through her from the chest outward. The specific cold of understanding something you can't unlearn. And she kept her face from moving through the same mechanism she always used, and it cost her more than it ever had before. "Where did you get this?" she said. Her voice came out level. "Silas's secondary device," Dante said. "The one he didn't know we knew about." "Who is the sender?" Dante took the laptop back. "That's what I need you to help me answer." He set it down, looked at her with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite respect, but lived in the same neighborhood as both. Because the sender's address routes through the same cutout infrastructure you described, and the message was sent 3 days before you were given this assignment. Mara stood in the office, and the board was behind her with its photographs and its colored lines, and its careful record of a world she'd stepped into believing she understood. And she thought, Carver gave you this assignment. Carver built your legend. Carver put your name in a message to a man who was planning to let you die in Dante Marcelli's building as collateral after you'd served the purpose of getting yourself inside. She thought, you were never the investigator. You were always the instrument. "I need to sit down," she said. Nobody said anything. She sat. The chair was the secondary desk chair, functional, and she put both hands flat on her thighs and breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth and gave herself 90 seconds of allowing it to be as bad as it was. Then she stopped. "Carver has an emergency contact protocol," she said. "If I trigger it, he responds within 20 minutes. "You want to contact him?" Dante said. "Not a question. Evaluating." "I want to know if he picks up," she said, "because if he does, it means he doesn't know that Silas is out of play yet. And if he doesn't," she looked at Dante, "then we know the timeline on their next move is shorter than 12 hours. The room was quiet. Dante looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the calculation happening. Not whether she was trustworthy exactly, but whether her interests and his had aligned sufficiently to make the distinction academic. "Do it," he said. She triggered the protocol from memory. A specific sequence that would reach the number she'd never been allowed to save. She used the phone Dante handed her, a clean device, untraceable from their end. It rang 4 times. Then a voice she knew, professionally neutral, slightly processed. "Boss." "I need extraction," she said. "The job is compromised. I need out." A pause. Brief. Calculated. "What's your status?" "Contained. Not hostile, but I need extraction within the hour or I'm burning the whole thing." Another pause. Longer. She counted the seconds. "Stand by," Carver said. The line went quiet. Not dead, just held. She could hear the faint electronic texture of a call on hold. Dante was watching her. She held the phone steady and looked back at him and waited. 40 seconds later, Carver came back. "The asset's location has been confirmed," he said, and something in his phrasing was wrong. Too careful, too formal for the kind of call this was supposed to be. "Extraction will move within 90 minutes. Stay where you are." The line closed. Mara lowered the phone. "He said stay where you are," she said, "and he confirmed my location." "You didn't give him your location," Dante said. "No," she said. "I didn't." The room absorbed that. The young man at the laptop said quietly, "I've got vehicle plates from the parking structure. 3 vehicles in the 2 hours prior. 2 came back clean. The third—" He stopped, scrolled. "Registered to a shell company. Harwick Asset Management, incorporated 14 months ago, Delaware, no physical address." Dante's eyes moved to Mara. She knew the name. She'd seen it. In the header of the documentation that had come with her assignment briefing, in the fine print of the cover identity materials, in a place she'd noticed and filed and not thought about. Because why would she? It was administrative. It was paperwork. It was the machinery behind the machinery that she'd been trained to not look at too closely. Harwick Asset Management had funded her legend. "The same company," she said. Not a question. The same company, Dante confirmed. She stood up. The chair rolled back slightly. She crossed to the board on the wall and stood in front of it and looked at the lines and the photographs and the names, and she found the left side cluster she hadn't had context for before. And she looked at the photographs in it, and she looked at the names beneath them, and she said, "Who is this?" Dante came to stand beside her. He pointed to a photograph near the top of the cluster. A man, 60s. The kind of face that belonged to boardrooms and was therefore at home nowhere and everywhere, and said a name that meant nothing to her. Then he pointed to the photograph beside it, and the name beneath that photograph was Carver, not the name she knew him by. A different name, a real name, and the photograph was taken from enough distance that she could only confirm the shape of the face, the specific posture, the set of the shoulders she'd seen once in a lobby 3 years ago when Carver had been visible for exactly 4 seconds before disappearing into a car. She looked at the photograph for a long time. "How long have you had this?" she said. 6 weeks, Dante said. "You've known about Silas for 6 weeks." "I've known about the network," he said. "Not the specifics of the operation. I didn't know the timing. I didn't know the method." He paused. "I didn't know they were going to try to insert someone." She turned to look at him. The office was very still. "You knew something was coming and you didn't change the gala," she said. "I needed to see the shape of it," he said. "You needed to see the shape of it," she repeated, and something sharp moved through her voice. "And I was—" She stopped, rebuilt. "You let the evening happen." "I had precautions in place." "The drink got through your precautions." His jaw tightened. "Yes, it did." She looked at him and felt anger that was sharp, and then felt it pass because the anger was a luxury she didn't have right now, and because she was honest enough to recognize this, she understood the reasoning. You don't reveal that you know about a plot until you understand the full scope of it. You let it run until you can see the whole map. It was what she would have done. It was exactly what she would have done. "You should have died at that party," she said. "Your precautions weren't enough, and you should have died." "I know," he said, "and I was a surprise." "Yes." She turned back to the board. "So now we have 12 hours before whoever Carver is working for sends something to get Silas back. And they already know where I am because I just confirmed it for them. And the driver—" She stopped, refocused. "Lena. How bad?" "Alive," Dante said. The photograph was taken before they moved her. She's not at the parking structure anymore. "They're holding her." "Yes?" "Which means the 12-hour deadline isn't really about Silas," Mara said. "Silas is the ask. Lena is the leverage. And when 12 hours is up—" She stopped again, working through it. "What happens after 12 hours doesn't matter to them as much as what happens in the next 2. Because I just told Carver I'm here, I'm contained, and I'm stable. He's going to move on that information before I can become a problem." Dante turned to the young man at the laptop. "Get Reyes." The young man made a call. Within 3 minutes, a woman appeared in the office doorway. 40s, dark hair pulled back, the specific kind of competent at rest that Mara recognized as genuine rather than performed. She wore no expression beyond attentiveness. Her eyes went to Mara immediately and stayed there while Dante briefed her in under 90 seconds. And at no point during the briefing did she look surprised. "We moved Silas to the secondary location," Reyes said when Dante finished. "Now, not in 2 hours. If they have a window on this building, they may already be timing." "Agreed," Dante said. "What do we do about Voss?" Reyes said, meaning Mara, talking about her like she wasn't in the room. Mara answered before Dante could. "Voss goes with the transport," she said, "because Carver thinks I'm sitting still. And if I'm moving with your people, any surveillance they have on this location is going to be reading a very different picture than the one they're expecting." Reyes looked at Dante. Dante looked at Mara. The moment held its shape for 3 full seconds. "She comes," Dante said. Reyes didn't argue. She nodded once and disappeared back into the corridor, already making calls. 30 minutes later, Mara was in the back of a vehicle she didn't recognize, dressed in a jacket that belonged to someone on Dante's staff and was slightly too large in the shoulders, moving through lower Manhattan in a convoy of 3 cars that were taking a route she couldn't entirely follow. Dante was in the lead car. Reyes was beside Mara. Two men in the front she didn't know. Silas was in the third car. She hadn't seen him, hadn't asked to, but she knew he was there the way you know certain things, from the configuration of the vehicles, from the weight of attention the convoy carried. She thought about what Silas had built over months, the careful positioning, the used Valentina like a tool, and aimed her like a weapon at the man who had trusted him most. And she felt something that wasn't quite contempt. Contempt was too simple, but was in the same territory. They were on the West Side Highway when Reyes's phone lit up. Reyes looked at the screen. Her face didn't change. She tapped the driver's shoulder twice. The driver said something short into his earpiece. Mara said, "What?" "Lead car," Reyes said, already reaching toward the door panel. "Dante's vehicle. They have a tail." Mara turned to look through the rear window. Traffic. Normal traffic, or the shape of normal traffic, the kind that could be either. "How many?" "Two confirmed. Possibly three." Reyes was on her phone now. They moved into position at the on-ramp. Somebody was watching the building. Mara felt the cold again, different this time. Not the cold of understanding, but the cold of events moving faster than calculation. "They knew we were moving." "Yes." "Which means someone in the convoy." "Don't," Reyes said sharp. "Not now." The driver accelerated. The car in front of them, not Dante's, the middle car, accelerated too, and then everything happened at once in the specific way that things happen in moving vehicles when they go wrong. A sound from the front of the convoy, not a crash, but something sharper, deliberate, and the lead car's brake lights blazing red, and Reyes saying something into her phone that Mara didn't process because she was already looking at the traffic behind them and counting the vehicles that were moving with them, instead of reacting to the disruption the way civilian drivers would. 3. She counted 3. The convoy stopped. Not neatly, at an angle, 2 cars blocking the rightmost lanes, the lead car slightly ahead and angled wrong, and Mara saw the figure get out of the driver's side of the lead car, and it wasn't Dante, it was one of his men, and she thought, "Where is Dante?" And then she saw the door on the passenger side open, and Dante stepped out and he was moving wrong. "He's hit," Reyes said into the phone, and that was the first crack in her composure. Mara was out of the car before she'd decided to be. The logic was not strategic. It was the same logic as the ballroom, the same wiring that had moved her across the room before her brain had finished the sentence. And she was aware of Reyes calling after her and aware of the cars behind them and aware of the specific quality of the light on the highway in the early evening, that flat industrial light. And she crossed the distance between her car and Dante's in a low run, using the vehicles as cover. He was leaning against the lead car's door. His hand was pressed to his side, left side, below the ribs, and the hand was dark. Not bad. Or maybe bad. Hard to assess from where she was. "How deep?" she said, reaching him, getting her hand over his. "Graze," he said. "Maybe." His voice was controlled but thin at the edges, the kind of controlled that costs. "Can you move?" "I'm moving," he said, which was technically true in that he wasn't falling. She looked back at the highway. The 3 vehicles behind had stopped. Doors were opening, and in the opposite lanes, she looked, she counted, she processed. 1 vehicle moving against the flow of stopped traffic, which meant it had come from the front. They were being compressed from both sides. And Silas was in the third car. She looked at Dante. "Silas," she said, "is there any chance at all, that Silas told them the secondary location?" Dante's face was a controlled thing that was working very hard. "The secondary location was decided this morning." "Who knew it?" He looked at her. 4 people, plus Silas, who was already contained when the decision was made. "Contained where?" A pause, not long, but long enough. "The secondary location," he said. The thing that moved through her then wasn't just cold. It was the complete structural collapse of a framework, the understanding that there was no secondary location that was safe, that there had never been a secondary location that was safe, because Silas had been held there while the destination was planned, and Silas did not need a phone to pass information if the information could be passed another way. She thought about the timing. She thought about the route. She thought about the convoy that had been put together in 30 minutes, in an office, in front of a man who had spent years learning how to be invisible in a room. He already knew, she said. He knew before we moved him. He'd already told them. Dante's hand was still pressed to his side. His eyes were on her face. We need to move, she said. Not to the secondary. Somewhere they haven't been told about. There isn't. There has to be, she said. Something old. Something from before Silas. Something you've never told anyone who came after. The highway noise was building, the sounds of vehicles and distance closing. Reyes was coordinating something behind them. She could hear it. Two of Dante's men were moving forward to engage or delay. Dante looked at her. He was in pain, and it was costing him to not show it, and she could see both things clearly. Pier 61, he said. It's been unused for 8 years. I bought it through a name that doesn't appear anywhere Silas could have accessed. Can you get your people there without going through anyone Silas knew? He thought. Fast. She could see him running the list. Reyes, he said. Only Reyes. Then call her, Mara said. Right now. Nobody else in this convoy gets the destination. She straightened up, looked back at the vehicles closing on them, and felt the weight of everything that had been set in motion by a kiss at a party, and how far the consequences of that moment had traveled, and how many more miles they had yet to go. And then she heard a sound that wasn't right. From the third car, from where Silas was, a short, sharp sound, and one of the men guarding that vehicle went down, not dramatically but suddenly, the way people go down, and the door of the third car opened. Silas stepped out onto the West Side Highway in the flat evening light, and he looked at Dante, and he looked at Mara, and he straightened his cuffs with the particular composure of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment. He had a phone in his hand. He held it up so they could see the screen. On the screen was Lena, the driver, live, a video feed, a room Mara didn't recognize. I want to be clear about what happens next, Silas said, loudly enough to carry over the highway noise, calmly enough that the loudness felt obscene. He was looking at Dante, not at Mara, not at Reyes, at Dante, with the particular attention of someone who has spent years constructing a single long goodbye. You don't have 12 hours anymore. You have about 90 seconds before the people behind you get close enough that this conversation becomes irrelevant. He looked then at Mara. You, he said, were supposed to be gone by now. He said it without anger, which was worse than anger would have been. You were the piece nobody planned for, the random variable. Something moved in his expression, Chud. Not quite admiration, not quite resentment. A third thing that lived between them. The kiss. Mara looked at him. You built my legend, she said. We built your legend, he corrected, and we gave it to you wrapped in a mission you'd actually believe in. Ansel's name was real. He is running the auction money. We just gave you that information because you needed a reason to walk into that ballroom. He glanced back at Dante. She was supposed to see what happened to you. Confirm it. Report back that it was clean, and then... He didn't finish the sentence. And then I was going to be cleaned up, Mara said. You were a witness, Silas said. Witnesses are a resource until they aren't, Dante said very quietly from beside her. Silas. Silas looked at him, and for a single fractional moment, something real moved across his face. Not remorse, but something adjacent to it, the shadow of what it cost to be this kind of person. Then it was gone. Walk away from her, Silas said to Dante. Give me the organization. The Serrano family absorbs the northern corridors under new management, under my management. You walk away with your life, which is more than the plan originally allowed. He paused. The offer expires in 60 seconds, because after that, this situation becomes something none of us control. Dante looked at Mara. She looked back at him. She thought about what she'd said in the kitchen, that she'd been placed here, that she was someone else's instrument. And she thought about the fact that Silas was right. She was the variable nobody had planned for, and that the only thing that made a variable dangerous was that it was unpredictable, and that she had approximately 60 seconds to be as unpredictable as she had ever been in her life. She thought about Valentina Serrano, who had been given a weapon and pointed at a man and told it was her own idea. She thought about what it meant to be used. Then she looked at Silas Moretti on the West Side Highway with his careful face and his phone and his 60-second countdown, and she said, "You need to know something before this goes any further." Silas looked at her. "Carver is already burned," she said. "I burned the address before we left the building. The whole cutout infrastructure, every account, every routing path. Your people on the outside have already lost their communication network. You've been running this for 6 weeks, and in the last 3 hours, it's been dismantled from inside." It was a lie. A complete, unverifiable, structurally plausible lie. And for 3 seconds, she watched Silas Moretti recalculate. And in those 3 seconds, Dante moved. He moved fast for a man who was bleeding, and he moved with the specific economy of someone who had been waiting for exactly 3 seconds of distraction. And the phone was out of Silas's hand before Silas finished his recalculation. And Reyes was already there, and the men from the other vehicles were already closing, and the convoy behind them had reached the edge of the engagement zone and was stopping, uncertain, because the choreography they'd been told to expect had just changed into something nobody had briefed them on. Silas was on the ground, not hurt, contained, Reyes's knee between his shoulder blades and her hand in his collar, and an expression on her face like she'd been waiting a long time for this particular moment. Dante straightened. His hand was back against his side. He looked at Mara. "Pier 61, she said. "Pier 61, he agreed. And then, because the situation required it and because there wasn't time for anything more nuanced, "Can you walk?" "Yes," he said. "Then walk," she said. "Because we have about 30 seconds before whoever was in those vehicles decides they don't need Silas's instructions to know what to do next." They walked, and behind them on the highway, in the flat evening light, with the city pressing in from all sides and the whole weight of a broken plan collapsing into the space where they were standing, Mara Voss felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear exactly, and not calm, but the particular stripped clarity of a person who has nothing left to perform for anyone, who has been used and lied to and aimed and discarded, and who has decided in the most fundamental way possible that she is done being anyone else's instrument. Whatever came next, whatever Pier 61 held, whatever Carver would do when he discovered the lie, whatever remained of Valentina's hatred and Silas's plan and the network that had been built to hollow out Dante Marcelli's empire from the inside, she was going to meet it as herself. For the first time since she'd walked into the Harrington Grand in her second-hand dress, she didn't know what that self was capable of. She was about to find out. Pier 61 smelled like rust and river water, and the particular decay of a place that had once moved enormous quantities of something important and now moved nothing at all. The Hudson pressed against the pilings with a sound like slow breathing, patient and indifferent, and the light inside the warehouse structure was the color of old bruises. What little came through the high, dirty windows, anyway. The rest was dark. Reyes had the generator running inside 4 minutes. Not full power, enough to pull 3 work lights to life at the center of the space, casting a hard yellow circle that made the darkness outside it feel closer and more deliberate. The floor was concrete, cracked, with old water stains spreading in patterns that looked like maps of places nobody wanted to go. Mara got Dante sitting on a packing crate inside the light and got his hand away from his side. The jacket was dark enough that she'd been reading the damage wrong. Up close, under the work light, it was worse than graze but better than deep. A long tear across the left flank, the kind that bled with conviction and hurt with the same commitment, but had missed everything that mattered by a margin she wasn't going to think too hard about. "I need something to close this," she said. Reyes was already moving. She came back with a kit that had clearly been stocked by someone who planned for exactly this kind of evening. And Mara went to work without preamble because there wasn't time for preamble, and because Dante was the kind of man who would perform being fine until he wasn't, and she needed him functional. He didn't make a sound while she worked. He breathed through it, slow, deliberate, the careful management of a person who had learned somewhere along the way that pain was information and not necessarily an emergency. She felt his muscles lock under her hands when she pressed the wound closed and held it, and she felt them release incrementally as he controlled his way back down from the spike of it. "Silas," he said while she was working. Flat. Not angry, just the name, meaning, what do we do with him? "He's contained," Reyes said from somewhere behind them. "For now." His people on the highway. Dispersed when the convoy stopped engaging. They didn't have a contingency for losing him. Reyes paused. They'll regroup. We have maybe 2 hours before they have a new directive. From Carver, Mara said. From whoever Carver answers to, Dante said. He looked at her hands on his side, not at her face. The lie you told on the highway, about burning the infrastructure. It was a lie, she said. I needed 3 seconds. I know it was a lie. He looked up then. But it was the right shape. Silas believed it because it was plausible, which means the infrastructure is a real vulnerability, something they're actually afraid of losing. He paused. Which means we can actually do it. Mara finished what she was doing and pressed a bandage into place with more force than was strictly necessary, and Dante absorbed it. The cutout system Carver uses, she said. I know 3 of the routing addresses. I use them to receive assignments. If someone who knew the architecture could trace the path. Reyes, Dante said. Already thinking about it, Reyes said. Mara stepped back, looked at Dante sitting under the work light on the cracked concrete of a pier that had been sitting empty for 8 years, and thought about how different he looked from the man at the bar in the Harrington Grand. The same stillness, the same controlled surface, but something underneath it now that hadn't been visible before. Or maybe it had been there, and she hadn't had the context to read it. Valentina, she said, because the name had been sitting in the back of the room since the highway, waiting. Dante looked at her. Silas used her, Mara said. She tried to kill you, and she was used to do it. Whatever you're planning for the Serrano family, whatever settlement you're running through your head right now, she's not the same problem as Silas. She put a cyanide capsule in my drink, he said. Because he told her it was her own idea, Mara said. There's a difference. The warehouse held the silence for a moment. Outside, the river moved against the pilings. That's a very forgiving position, Dante said, for someone who didn't almost die. I almost died tonight too, she said. Your highway wasn't a particularly safe place to be. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The shadow of one. Then Reyes said, We have a problem. And the shadow was gone. She was at the far end of the warehouse, near a side door, phone in hand, her face doing the thing it did when she was assembling bad information into an order that could be communicated. Lena's location, she said. We've been running the video feed from Silas's phone, trying to pull environmental data, light quality, audio, anything with a signature. And, Dante said, the room she's in is in a building with a very specific HVAC sound. We cross-referenced it. She paused. It's a building on West 37th. The Serrano family holds the lease on floors 7 through 9. The warehouse went quiet in a different way than before. They moved her to Serrano property, Mara said. Or she was always there, Reyes said. The photograph from the parking structure might have been staged. They may have had her before the gala even ended. Dante stood up from the crate. He did it carefully, but he did it completely. And when he was upright, his face was composed, and his eyes were doing the thing she'd seen them do before. The cold, complete architecture of a man who had moved past feeling things into the space where decisions live. How many people can you put together in an hour? He said to Reyes. 8, maybe 10 if I pull from the secondary roster. Pull from the secondary roster. Dante. Reyes said his name the way someone says a name when they want to attach a whole conversation to it. Going into Serrano property for one person, she drove for me for 6 years, he said. Not loud, not heated. She drove me for 6 years, and they took her because she was in the wrong car. Reyes looked at him. Then she nodded and walked toward the far end of the warehouse with her phone. Mara watched this. She thought about 6 years and the weight of it, and the particular loyalty that moves in both directions when it's real. And she thought about how easy it was to reduce men like Dante to the category of what they controlled and forget that loyalty was a thing that ran in them too, maybe deeper for being less legible from the outside. She moved to stand beside him. I'm going with you, she said. No. I know Carver's communication patterns. I know how they'll signal to the people inside that building. If something goes wrong, something will go wrong, he said. It always goes wrong. That's not the variable. Then I'm more useful inside than standing here, she said, and you know it. He looked at her for a long moment. The work light made shadows out of everything. You don't owe this, he said. Whatever you think you owe, the ballroom, the highway, you don't. I know, she said. That's not why. He held her gaze. She held it back. Stay with Reyes, he said. Do what she says. She took that as yes, because it was. The building on West 37th was a commercial property that had been dressed to look like other commercial properties. Nothing on the exterior that marked it, nothing at street level that would pull a second glance. 8 stories of glass and steel that held, on its upper floors, the administrative machinery of a family that had been in this city for 3 generations and knew how to make its presence invisible when it needed to. They went in from the parking structure below. Not because it was the most elegant approach, but because the parking structure connected to the building's service infrastructure. And the service infrastructure, as Reyes had quietly noted while they were moving, had not been updated since the building's last renovation in 2019, which meant the camera system had a specific dead zone in the southeast corridor of sublevel 2. Mara was the third one through the access door behind Reyes and a man named Caro, who had the particular build of someone who had never done a thing in half measures. The air in the service corridor was cold and smelled of concrete and mechanical systems, and the lights were industrial fluorescents that buzzed faintly at a frequency just below the threshold of conscious annoyance. Dante was at the back of the group. She'd argued about that. Reyes had ended the argument by pointing out, without particular emotion, that the man had a wound that needed to not be reopened for the next 40 minutes, and putting him at the back where he didn't need to physically lead the breach was a tactical decision, not an insult. Dante had not argued. He'd simply moved to the back. They took the service elevator to the 7th floor. Reyes had the floor plan, pulled from the building's permit records, which were public, which was the kind of thing that felt like it should be more difficult than it was. 7th floor held administrative offices during business hours and was, at 10:40 on a weeknight, minimally staffed. The people holding Lena would be on 8 or 9, where the family kept spaces that didn't appear on any permit. The elevator opened, and they moved out into a corridor that was dim, emergency lighting only, the offices dark behind their glass partitions. And the team spread out automatically into the configuration they'd established in the van on the way over, the kind of shorthand that existed between people who had done this before. Mara stayed close to Reyes. She'd been given a sidearm she hadn't asked about the provenance of, and it sat in her hand with the specific weight of a thing that meant all alternatives had been removed. They found the stairwell access to 8 without contact. The 8th floor was different, not dramatically. The architecture was the same glass-partitioned offices, the same dim emergency lighting. But there were voices. Low, not alarmed, the specific tone of people who were guarding something and weren't expecting the guard to be necessary. 3 different vectors of sound that Mara triangulated to 2 separate locations, one near the northeast corner, one near the central corridor. Reyes held up fingers. Mara held very still and listened to her own breathing, counted it down. What happened next took 40 seconds and was not clean, and she did not look away from any of it. They found Lena in a glass-walled conference room at the northeast corner of the 8th floor, zip-tied to a chair with a bruise along her jaw that looked like it had opinions about how the evening had gone. She was conscious. When she saw Reyes come through the door, she said something short and vicious that was clearly directed at the men who'd been guarding her rather than the people arriving. Mara got the zip ties while Reyes covered the door, and she worked fast, and Lena's hands came free, and Lena stood immediately, which told Mara everything she needed to know about the kind of person Lena was. "Can you walk?" Mara said. "I've been sitting in a chair for 3 hours," Lena said. "My legs work fine." "Good," Mara said, "because we're moving." They were moving, back through the conference room door, into the corridor where Caro and 2 others were holding the space. When the floor changed, not structurally, in pressure, in sound, in the specific atmospheric quality of a place that has been quiet and is about to not be. Reyes said, "Top floor," and she meant it as information and as warning simultaneously. The 9th floor had heard them. Mara thought, of course it did. You cannot move 8 people through a building in 40 seconds without sound traveling in a structure that was designed to transfer air and noise efficiently through its ventilation systems. They'd been as quiet as they could be, and it hadn't been enough. She thought, this is where it goes wrong. Reyes was already calculating out loud, quiet, clipped, the verbal equivalent of moving chess pieces. Stairwell, service elevator, ground floor in under 4 minutes if they moved now. The external team was holding on 37th for extraction. If they hit the street in 4 minutes, they had cover. They moved. Down the stairwell, Lena between Reyes and Caro, moving fast, Mara on the inside of the group. Dante's people spread front and rear. The stairwell was a concrete acoustic chamber, and their footsteps were a sound that Mara felt in her back teeth, and from above them, distant but descending, she could hear the corresponding sound of people moving from 9. 3 flights, 2 flights. The door to sublevel 2 opened, and Mara went through it and almost walked directly into a man she hadn't seen on any floor plan or in any briefing. She had maybe half a second to process his presence. Tall, compact, the particular ready posture of someone who had been waiting in exactly this position for exactly this moment. And she used all of it. She came inside his reach before he completed the motion he'd started, and the next 4 seconds were physical and ungraceful and entirely without the choreographic quality that such things have in the imagination. And when it was over, he was on the ground, and her shoulder felt like something had been reassembled wrong, and she was breathing in a way that had very little dignity. Caro pulled her upright without ceremony. They kept moving. The parking structure, the van. 3 minutes and 40 seconds from the 8th floor, which was close enough to Reyes's estimate that Mara filed it away as evidence that Reyes knew what she was doing. Dante was already in the van when she climbed in. He looked at her shoulder, which she was holding differently, and said nothing, which was its own kind of communication. They moved out of the structure onto 37th, and the external team fell in around them, and they drove, and nobody spoke for a full 2 minutes because nobody needed to, and also because some things need a moment of quiet before language can catch them. Lena, from the seat ahead of Mara, said to the general interior of the van, "Are we going to address the part where Silas Moretti arranged all of this?" "Yes," Dante said. "Good," Lena said, "because I have thoughts." Dante looked at Mara. She looked back. Something moved between them in the dark interior of the moving van, not the ballroom electricity of the kiss or the kitchen tension of the morning, but something more stripped than either of those things. The specific, exhausted acknowledgement of 2 people who have been in the same sequence of worst-case scenarios and are still, against reasonable expectation, present. She looked away first. Looked at the city moving past the window. They took Silas to a location she wasn't given the address of in advance, a secondary property that had been held in a corporate name that predated Silas's tenure by a decade, the kind of precaution that felt paranoid until it was the only thing standing between you and complete exposure. It was a warehouse conversion in Red Hook, functional, sparse, with the particular quality of a space that was used for important things and never decorated. Silas had been secured in a chair in the center of the main room. His cuffs were perfect. His face was a careful construction of composure. The same face he'd been wearing since the highway, and Mara thought, he's been building toward this conversation too. He's been preparing. Whatever he says next has been prepared. Dante walked in and stood in front of him and looked at him for a long time without speaking, and the quiet had its own weight. "How long?" Dante said finally. Silas looked at him. 14 months, he said. "Active planning. The contact before that goes back 2 years." 2 years? Yes. Dante didn't move. Mara, standing at the edge of the room, watched him not move and thought about what it cost to hold that still when the number was 2 years. "Why?" Dante said. Silas looked genuinely, briefly surprised by the question, as if he'd prepared for every interrogation except the simple one. "Because you were always going to be the ceiling," he said. "Not a floor. A ceiling. I spent 12 years building the architecture of everything you run, and I was always the man behind, never the man in front. And you never—" He stopped. Reset. "You never asked why. You never asked what I wanted. You assumed the answer was what you were prepared to offer. What did you want? Dante said. To matter, Silas said, on my own terms, not as an extension of yours. The room held this. Mara thought, that's the most human thing he's said since the highway, which made it the most dangerous. Dante looked at him for another long moment. Then, the external network, the people Carver connects to. I need names, and I need contact protocols. Silas said nothing. I'm not going to ask twice, Dante said. I know, Silas said, and then in a tone that was almost conversational, the woman in the second-hand dress is going to be a problem for you. Dante didn't look at Mara. She's not your concern. She's everyone's concern, Silas said, because she's the only person in this city who has moved through all of this from the outside and is still standing. Do you know what that makes her? He looked at Mara then, across the room, with something in his eyes that she couldn't entirely categorize. It makes her the most dangerous variable in play, not because of what she knows, because of what she's decided. She hasn't decided anything, Dante said. She decided at the ballroom, Silas said. Everything since then has been the consequence. Mara held his gaze. She didn't speak. She thought about what he was doing, whether it was manipulation or something else, whether a man who had spent 12 years reading rooms and positioning people was capable of a statement that was simply true. She thought about the kiss and the cold ballroom logic of it, and the way that logic had unraveled into everything that had followed, all the way to this room, this chair, this conversation. She thought, he's not wrong. Dante stepped closer to Silas, close enough that the conversation changed dimension, became something with physical proximity in it. The names, he said. Silas looked at him. Something in his face resolved. Not defeat exactly, but the release of a tension that had been held too long. There are 7 people in the network above Carver, he said. 3 of them are in this city. One of them you've met. You shook his hand at the Harrington Grand 2 weeks before the gala. Dante was very still. He was there to see the terrain, Silas said, to verify that the plan was viable. He stood next to you for about 40 seconds near the East Bar. He paused. His name is Marcus Hale, and he runs the investment vehicle that funded your expansion into the northern corridors 18 months ago. Mara felt something drop through her chest. 18 months ago. The expansion. The capital that had come in from what Dante had believed was a legitimate private equity source that had moved the Marcelli organization into territories it hadn't previously controlled. She'd seen it on the board. The lines of expansion marked in one color, the lines of organizational structure in another. The capital that had built the northern corridors had come from the same network that had tried to dismantle them. He funded you, Mara said from the edge of the room. In order to own you. Silas looked at her. In order to have standing, he said. You can't absorb an organization from the outside. You have to become load-bearing first, become something the structure depends on. And then, when the time comes, he spread his hands slightly within their constraints. You're not taking anything. You're just calling in what was always yours. The room was very quiet. Reyes from the doorway said, Hell. I know the name, Dante said. He's in the city, Reyes said. He was at a dinner on Park Avenue tonight. He left at 10. We don't have current location. Dante turned from Silas. His face had gone to a place she hadn't seen it go before, beyond calculation, into something more absolute. She thought about what he'd just learned, that the expansion he'd built, the territories he'd moved into, the capital that had made it possible, all of it had been a slow and patient architecture of ownership. 18 months of building, and the building had always belonged to someone else. She crossed the room and stood in front of him, and he looked at her, and she looked back, and she said, Not tonight. He said, Mara. Not tonight, she said again. Not like this. Not when he knows Silas is gone and the plan is exposed and every person he has in this city is already repositioning. She held his gaze. You go after Marcus Hale tonight and you're walking into a room he's had time to prepare. Every hour I wait is an hour he uses, Dante said. Yes, she said, and every move you make in the next 12 hours without a full picture is a move he's already accounted for. She didn't look away. You want to end this. I understand that, but ending it wrong is worse than not ending it. The air between them had the specific quality of two people who are running out of time to disagree. What do you need? He said. 12 hours, she said, and Silas's full cooperation on the network structure, and everything you have on Marcus Hale going back 18 months. She paused. And I need to make a call. To who? He said. She took a breath. To the only person in this city who has as much reason to want Marcus Hale exposed as you do, she said. And who he is not expecting to hear from. Dante watched her. Valentina Sorano, she said. The room went very still. Reyes in the doorway made no sound. Silas, in the chair, made no sound. Dante looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him running it. The logic, the risk, the particular gamble of the thing she was proposing, which was that the woman who had tried to kill him and the man who had nearly died from the attempt could find sufficient common ground in their mutual betrayal to build something that none of them could build alone. She'll want to know why she should trust anything we say, he said. I'll tell her the same thing I'd tell you if our positions were reversed, Mara said. That Silas used her. That the person who built the cage decides who you hate, and she's been hating the wrong person for a year and a half. Dante looked at her. And if she says no, then we go another way, Mara said. But she won't say no. You don't know her. I know what it feels like to be aimed, Mara said. And I know that when you find out you've been aimed, the anger doesn't go away. It just finds a new direction. Outside, the Hudson was doing its patient thing against the pilings of the city, and somewhere across the water, Marcus Hale was in a car, or a room, or a conversation, repositioning his pieces for the morning, and the clock that had started at the Harrington Grand with a broken champagne flute, and a second-hand dress, and a kiss that nobody had planned was still running. And Mara Voss stood in a Red Hook warehouse with blood on her jacket that wasn't entirely hers, and looked at Dante Marcelli and waited for him to decide whether he could trust the variable. He said, "Make the call." She reached for the phone, and from the chair across the room, Silas Moretti watched her do it, and the expression on his face was something she would think about for a long time afterward. Not anger, not calculation, but the look of a man who had spent 2 years building a plan and was watching it be rebuilt into something else entirely by the one piece he had never seen coming. Valentina Sorano picked up on the third ring. She didn't say hello. She said, I wondered when this call would come. Mara stood in the corner of the Red Hook warehouse with the phone against her ear and everyone in the room pretending not to listen, and she said, Then you know why I'm calling. A pause. The sound of a room on the other end, quiet, contained, the specific quality of a space where someone had been sitting alone for hours. Silas, Valentina said. Not a question. Silas, Mara confirmed. Another pause, longer. Mara waded through it because some pauses needed to be waded through rather than filled. He told me, Valentina said finally, that Dante was planning to dissolve the merger after the engagement. That the alliance was always meant to be a takeover. That my family would be absorbed and restructured and I would be married into an organization I no longer had standing in. Her voice was steady and cold and exact, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed this accounting many times in the dark. He told me that removing Dante before the ceremony was the only way to protect the Sorano name. And you believed him, Mara said. I believed him because he knew things, Valentina said. Internal things, meeting details, financial projections I hadn't shared with anyone outside the family. A beat. He had access to everything. He sounded like someone who was on my side. He was on his own side, Mara said. Everything he told you was structured to move you toward the outcome he needed. The merger details were real. The interpretation he gave you was not. Silence. Is Dante alive? Valentina said. Yes. Is he... She stopped. Is he going to come for my family? Mara looked across the room at Dante, who was looking back at her. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said into the phone, That depends on what happens in the next 12 hours, and whether you're willing to be in the same room as the man you tried to kill. The silence this time was different, longer, textured with something Mara couldn't fully read through a phone line, but could feel the shape of the particular weight of a person measuring the distance between what they'd done and what they could still do. "Where?" Valentina said. Mara gave her the address. She arrived an hour later, alone, which was either a statement of courage or of the specific fatalism that sometimes looks like courage from the outside. She wore a coat over what appeared to be the clothes she'd been sitting in for hours. Dark trousers, a plain top, none of the armor of the gala. Her hair was down. The rings were still on her right hand. The bruise of the evening was in her eyes rather than on her face, and she walked into the Red Hook warehouse and stopped when she saw Dante and looked at him with an expression that Mara found difficult to watch because it was too unguarded for the context. "I thought you were dead," Valentina said. The words were flat, but the flatness was effortful. "I know," Dante said. "I thought I'd—" She stopped, rebuilt. "I thought it had worked." "It almost did," Dante said. "It didn't because of her." He meant Mara without looking at her, and Mara felt the strange weight of being indicated without being centered. Valentina looked at Mara, took her in with the complete attention of someone doing a thorough revision of a previously held position. "You were at the gala," she said. "Yes." "You kissed him." "Yes." Valentina looked at her for another moment. Something moved in her face that was not warmth, but was not entirely hostile either. The grudging recognition of a complexity she hadn't anticipated. "I thought that was the most extraordinary thing I'd ever seen," she said. "I thought, who is this woman and what is she doing? And then I thought, it doesn't matter because it was too late anyway." Her jaw tightened fractionally. "Except it wasn't." "No," Mara said. "It wasn't." Dante moved then, not toward Valentina, but to the secondary table where Reyes had laid out what they had on Marcus Hale. He put his hands flat on the table and looked at it, and when he looked up at Valentina, his face had the quality of a man who has moved through the phase of the evening that was about feeling things and arrived at the phase that was about finishing them. "Hale funded the Marcelli expansion 18 months ago," he said. "You know this." Valentina's expression shifted. "My family facilitated the introduction," she said carefully. "Your family introduced me to the man who spent 18 months building a financial stake in my organization specifically so he could call it in," Dante said. "Whether your family knew what Hale intended is a question I've been sitting with." The room was very still. "My father," Valentina said, and then stopped. And the stop told Mara more than the sentence would have. She watched Valentina make a decision in real time. The decision to say a thing that couldn't be unsaid, that would change the architecture of whatever came next. "My father knew the capital was structured unusually. He didn't know the full intent. He thought Hale was building a bridge between two organizations, not a mechanism for acquisition." "And when did he find out otherwise?" Dante said. Another stop. Longer. 6 months ago, Valentina said. Hale told him the timeline had moved up. Told him the merger was the final step. That once the Marcelli and Sorano organizations were formally united, Hale's financial stake gave him controlling influence over the combined entity. She looked at Dante steadily. "My father told me we were trapped, that we had to proceed with the engagement or Hale would call in the financial instruments and we would lose the Northern Territory assets." "So the merger wasn't political," Dante said. "It was a cage for both of us." "Yes," Valentina said. Dante straightened up from the table. The room breathed around that word. "And Silas approached you when," Mara said, because she was following the thread. 4 months ago, Valentina said. "He knew about Hale's leverage. He said—" She closed her eyes briefly, opened them. "He said the only way out from under Hale was to remove you before the merger formalized. That with you gone, the financial instruments would be contested in the organizational transition and Hale would lose his window." She looked at her own hands. "He said it would free both families." "Instead, it would have handed him everything," Mara said. "An organization in transition, a grieving and politically isolated Serrano family, and Carver's network positioned to move into the vacuum." "Yes," Valentina said quietly. "I understand that now." Dante looked at her for a long time. The look had layers that Mara couldn't fully parse. The complexity of two people who had been at a table together for a year, who had constructed something that turned out to be a trap for both of them, who had been moved against each other by a third party with sufficient skill that the manipulation had looked from inside it like reality. "Can your father put Hale in a room?" Dante said. Valentina looked up. "What kind of room?" "The kind where I can have a conversation with him," Dante said. "Formally, with witnesses. The kind of conversation where he has to show his instruments and I can show mine, in front of enough people that whatever he does next has an audience." Valentina was quiet for a moment. "You want to expose him in front of the network?" "I want to remove him," Dante said. "And I want to do it in a way that doesn't leave a vacuum someone else moves into." He paused. "The only thing more dangerous than Hale is the uncertainty that comes after Hale." Valentina looked at Reyes, then at Mara, then back at Dante. "My father can make that call," she said. "Hale will come if the Serrano family requests a meeting. He thinks he still has leverage over us." "He does have leverage over you," Dante said. "Yes," Valentina said, "until you remove it." The thing that passed between them in that moment was not reconciliation. It was something more functional and less comfortable than reconciliation. The acknowledgement of shared interest in the absence of trust, the working relationship of two people who had been used against each other and were choosing deliberately to point the consequence in a different direction. "Tomorrow morning," Dante said. 10 o'clock, the Harrington Grand." Valentina looked at him. "The same room?" "The same room," he said. She nodded once. She looked at Mara for a moment, a look that contained something Mara couldn't immediately name, and then could. And it was the particular regard of a woman acknowledging another woman's impossible position and finding in it something that was almost solidarity. Then she turned and walked out of the warehouse into the Red Hook night, and the door closed behind her, and the room exhaled. Reyes said, "She could warn him." "She could," Dante said. "That doesn't concern you." "Everything concerns me," he said. "Some things you proceed with anyway." He looked at Mara. She looked back. "Go sleep somewhere," he said. "We have 6 hours." She didn't sleep. She sat in the van outside with the door cracked and the Hudson smell coming in, and she thought about all of it, Carver and the dead earpiece, and the legend that had been built for her by people who intended her to be disposable, and the ballroom, and the moment she'd crossed it, and whether the person she'd been before that moment would be comprehensible to her now. She thought about what Silas had said. She decided at the ballroom. She thought about whether that was true and found that it was, and that the decision had not been about Dante Marcelli at all. Not really, not in the moment it was made. It had been about a woman who was tired of looking away. She'd been looking away her whole career, not at the wrong things. She'd been looking at exactly what she was pointed at, but away from the edges of what she was doing, away from who was doing the pointing, away from the question of what it cost to be an instrument. You didn't ask those questions in her line of work. You kept your eyes on the assignment, and you metabolized the rest, and you went home to a life that was thin but functional. She didn't have that life anymore. Whatever came after tomorrow, that life was done. She found she wasn't grieving it. The Harrington Grand looked different at 9:40 in the morning, without the crystal and the flowers and the 500 bodies pressing warmth into the space. It looked like what it was. A large, expensive room with good bones and the faint smell of last night's event still in the air. The chandeliers were on at half power. The staff moved through the space with the purposeful quiet of people resetting a theater between performances. Dante arrived first and stood near the east bar in a dark suit that was not the same suit as the gala, but occupied the same register, and Mara stood slightly behind and to his left in clothes that Reyes had sourced from somewhere that morning, dark, fitted, functional. She had a sidearm she wasn't going to use unless everything else had failed. She looked at the room and thought about the last time she'd stood in it and what she'd seen from the other side. The Serrano patriarch arrived at 9:52. Rafael Serrano was 71, white-haired, the kind of man who carried authority the way certain buildings carry history, not loudly, but structurally, in every line. He shook Dante's hand with the grip of someone doing something difficult and choosing to do it directly. He looked at Mara without introduction, and she looked back and he moved on, which told her everything about how he'd processed the situation. Valentina was with him. She stood to her father's right and looked at the room with the particular composure of someone who had been up all night and was not going to let that be visible. And when her eyes came to Mara, she held them there for one steady second and then looked elsewhere. Reyes's people were distributed through the room in positions that looked like staff. Mara had counted 6 before Hale arrived. Marcus Hale came in at 10:04, 4 minutes late, which was a choice. He was 63, silver at the temples, with the boardroom face she'd seen in the photograph on the board, and a suit that announced itself without being loud about it. He brought 2 men with him, personal security, conservative, the kind of professional presence that was meant to signal confidence rather than threat. He shook Rafael Serrano's hand. He shook Dante's hand. He did not look at Mara. "I appreciate the early meeting," he said, in the voice of a man who appreciated nothing and evaluated everything. "I understand there have been some complications around the engagement timeline." "Sit down, Marcus," Dante said. Something in the phrasing, the first name, the lack of inflection, moved across Hale's face too quickly to catch. He sat. What followed was not a confrontation in the cinematic sense. It was quieter than that, and worse. Dante put documents on the table, printed, physical. The financial instruments from 18 months ago laid next to the communication records from Silas's secondary device laid next to the routing records from Carver's network that Reyes had spent the night dismantling and documenting. He put them on the table one at a time, without commentary, the way you lay down cards when the game is already decided and the laying down is only a formality. Hale looked at the documents. His face went through several things in a compressed period. Not fear exactly, but the physiological response of a man whose framework is being disassembled in real time. His hands, flat on the table, pressed down slightly. "This is a mischaracterization of a standard investment structure," he said. "The routing records are from your own network," Dante said. "The communication records are from my advisor who has been in contact with your organization for 2 years. He looked at Hale steadily. "The people in this room are not the audience for this conversation, Marcus. The people in this room already know. The audience is the 12 representatives of allied families who are currently in the adjoining room and have been listening for the last 8 minutes. Hale went still. "The door," Dante said, "has been open." Mara watched Hale's face as that landed, and it was the most honest thing she saw him do in the entire morning. The complete, unguarded rearrangement of a man who has understood too late that the trap he'd spent 18 months constructing had been reconstructed around him in a single night. His security moved slightly in the way that security moves when it's considering options. Reyes's people moved more, less visibly, and the security settled. "The instruments," Rafael Serrano said from his end of the table. His voice was not loud. It was the voice of a man who had carried the weight of what he'd permitted and had come here to close the account. "The financial instruments against the Serrano assets. You'll sign the release documents today." "Or," Dante said, "the communication records go to the 3 federal task forces that have been watching this city for the last 4 years, along with Carver's network documentation, which includes, I think you'll find, considerably more exposure than your current situation." Hale looked at the documents on the table. He looked at Rafael Serrano. He looked at Dante. He did not look at Mara, and she thought, because I'm the one he can't account for, and he knows it. "The instruments," Dante said again. Hale looked at his hands on the table. The morning light from the Harrington Grand's high windows came down across the room in the particular quality of autumn city light, clear and cold and without sentiment. "My lawyers," he started. "Are not here," Dante said. "You are." Another pause. Mara counted the seconds. 4, 5, 6. Hale said, "I'll need a pen." It took 40 minutes, because documents of that complexity take time even when the will to complete them has been removed from the equation. A lawyer materialized, one of Reyes, Mara assumed, with the release instruments already prepared because Reyes had prepared them the night before, because Reyes prepared for everything. Hale signed where he was directed. His hands were steady, which Mara found she respected despite everything, the way you respect a quality even when you don't respect its container. When it was done, the documents were collected. Hale's security was escorted from the room by people who were polite about it in a way that didn't leave room for discussion. Hale himself sat for a moment at the cleared table, and then he stood, and he looked at Dante, and he said, "This isn't a permanent solution." "Nothing is," Dante said. Hale left. The room held the space he'd occupied for a moment, the way rooms do, and then it released it. Rafael Serrano sat for a moment longer. He looked old in a way he hadn't when he'd walked in. Not damaged, but settled into his age, the way people settle into a weight they've been holding at distance and finally set down. He looked at Dante and said, "The engagement is formally dissolved. You'll receive documentation from our family's office by end of week." "Yes," Dante said. "What you build from here," Rafael started, then stopped, looked at Mara briefly, looked back at Dante. "What you build from here is your own matter." He stood. He looked at Valentina, who had been silent through the entirety of it, who had sat at the table with her hands folded and her face composed and her eyes recording everything. He looked at her with the specific exhaustion of a parent who has made insufficient decisions and is aware of it. "Come," he said. Valentina stood. She looked at Dante. "The Northern Corridor agreements that Hale's capital built. The Serrano family will honor our share of the infrastructure. Not because we're obligated to, because it was built on both our territories." She paused. "That's worth something, or it isn't. That's your determination." Dante looked at her for a moment. "It's worth something," he said. She nodded. She looked at Mara one last time, and the look was brief and direct, and said several things without saying any of them, and then she walked out with her father, and the Harrington Grand was very quiet. Reyes appeared at the door to the adjoining room, spoke briefly with someone inside, and then crossed to Dante and said, "The Allied representatives are satisfied. The documentation will be distributed through the appropriate channels by tonight." "Good," Dante said. "Silas." "We'll deal with Silas," Dante said. "Today. I'll talk to the families myself." He paused. "He gets due process within the organization. What he did was deliberate and it had consequences, and those consequences will be named and handled correctly. That's how it works." Reyes looked at him for a moment, then nodded. She walked back toward the adjoining room. She paused at the door. "Carver," she said, without turning. "The Federal Task Force documentation goes out tonight," Dante said. "Along with the network records. Let them handle it." He looked at Mara. "You're comfortable with that?" "Yes," she said. "Your name doesn't appear in what we send." "I know," she said. Reyes left. The ballroom was empty. The morning light had moved the way it moves in October, that particular angle that belongs entirely to the season and to no other. The East Bar was unmanned, the glasses racked neatly, the surface clean. The place on the floor where the champagne flute had shattered had been mopped and buffed and gave no evidence of what had happened there. Dante walked to the bar. He stood in approximately the place he'd been standing before, and he looked at the room, and Mara walked across the room toward him the way she'd walked across it before, but slower this time, because there was no urgency now, only the strange, stripped quality of aftermath. She stopped in front of him. He looked at her. The morning light was not flattering in the way that gala lighting was flattering. It was honest, which was better. It showed the tiredness around his eyes, and the tension still held in his jaw, and the faint evidence of a night that had cost more than any of it should have. "You should go," he said. "Whatever comes next for you, whatever you're building from here, you should go build it." "Is that what you want?" she said. He looked at her. "What I want," he said carefully, "isn't a simple inventory." "Try," she said. He was quiet for a moment. The room breathed around them. "I want to know," he said, "why you actually did it. In the moment. Before you knew anything about what this was or who I was. You crossed a room full of strangers, and you kissed a man you'd never seen to save his life." He held her gaze. "That's not instinct. Instinct is looking away. Instinct is maintaining cover and not blowing an assignment over a stranger's drink." He paused. "Why?" She'd thought about this. She'd thought about it in the van outside Pier 61, and on the highway and in the warehouse, and at every point in between where there was a moment long enough to contain a thought. She had a version of the answer that was clean and another version that was true, and she'd spent the whole night deciding which one she was going to give. "Because I was tired," she said. I've been looking the other way my entire career, looking at what I was aimed at and away from everything else. And I looked up for 1 second and I saw what was happening and I thought, she stopped, found the word. I thought, not this time. He watched her. It wasn't about you, she said. Not at first. It was about me, about being the kind of person who moves instead of looks away. She held his gaze. You happened to be the person I was moving toward. He was quiet for a moment. Something in his face had settled, not softened exactly, but resolved, the way a question resolves when it receives an answer that's sufficient. And now, he said, is it about you, or is it now? She said, it's considerably more complicated. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. This time it completed itself. It was not a large smile. It was the smile of a man who had spent a long time not having reasons for them, which made it mean more than a large smile would have. He reached out and put his hand against the side of her face, which was what she'd done to him in this room 4 days ago, and the echo of it was not lost on either of them. His hand was warm and the room was cold, and she didn't look away. I need 3 months, he said, to rebuild what Silas damaged, to restructure the organization in a way that doesn't leave this kind of vulnerability again, to deal with the aftermath correctly. His thumb moved slightly against her cheekbone. I'm not asking you to wait. I'm telling you what's true. I know what's true, she said. I'm fairly good at identifying it at this point. What are you going to do? He said. She thought about it. For real, not for performance. She thought about the legend that no longer existed and the handler who was about to have a very difficult conversation with federal investigators, and the organization she'd nominally worked for, which had been, she now understood, a thinner construction than she'd believed. She thought about what she actually knew how to do and what she was willing to do with it. Something different, she said. I don't know the shape yet. Fair, he said. His hand dropped from her face, but he didn't step back, and she didn't either. And the space between them was the specific distance of two people who have decided something without using the words for it. She looked around the ballroom one more time, the space where she'd stood that night, the angle she'd crossed it at, the place where the glass had broken. It seemed much smaller in the morning light, not diminished but correctly scaled, the way things look when you're not inside the emergency of them anymore. She looked back at him. 3 months, she said. 3 months, he said. She picked up her jacket from the bar where she'd set it, the jacket that wasn't hers, that was slightly too large in the shoulders, and she walked toward the exit, and at the door she stopped without turning. Dante, she said. Yes, he said. The kiss, she said. The first one. A pause. What about it? He said. I've been thinking about whether I'd do it differently, she said. If I knew then what I know now, all of it, everything it cost. The room held the question. Would you? He said. She stood at the door of the Harrington Grand Ballroom in a jacket that didn't fit and thought about cost and consequence and the particular arithmetic of moments that cannot be undone. And she thought about the version of herself who had looked across a glittering room and seen something happening and moved toward it instead of away. No, she said. I wouldn't change anything. She walked out into the October morning. The city was doing what the city always did. Indifferent and relentless and full of its own motion, the 10,000 simultaneous urgencies of a place that did not organize itself around any individual story. Mara walked out of the Harrington Grand and into it, and the door closed behind her, and the sound of the city came up around her like water. She had no legend, no assignment, no earpiece, live or dead, no handler waiting in a van 2 blocks away with bad coffee and a clean extraction route. She had a jacket that didn't fit and a sidearm she was going to have to think carefully about, and a phone with 3 contacts in it that she actually trusted, which was 3 more than she'd had 4 days ago. She walked south because south felt right, and after a block she felt the particular loosening in her chest that she didn't have an exact word for. Not relief, not safety, not happiness, but the physical sensation of a person who has been carrying a performance for a very long time and has finally set it down. Her shoulders were different without it. Her breathing was different. She felt the cold of the morning on her face and didn't modulate her response to it. She thought about Valentina Serrano, who would spend the next months rebuilding a position that had been constructed to trap her and was now, for the first time, her own to shape. She thought about Lena, who had driven for 6 years for a man worth driving for, and who would, she suspected, keep driving. She thought about Reyes, who prepared for everything and had been right about most of it. She thought about Silas Moretti in a room somewhere, waiting for the accounting that was coming, not with cruelty, but with the administrative correctness of an organization that understood that how you handle betrayal says more about you than the betrayal itself. She thought about the woman in the pale green dress at the East Flower arrangement, who had been given a weapon and told it was her own idea, and who had put it down when she understood what it had been. She thought about what it took to put something down that you'd already committed to, and whether that was weakness or the most difficult kind of strength. She thought about a man in a dark suit standing in an empty ballroom in the morning light, who had asked why and received an honest answer and given one in return, and who would spend the next 3 months rebuilding something that should, from its foundation up, be built to last. A cab went past, and she let it go. She kept walking. The city pressed in from all sides with its noise and its urgency and its complete indifference to the weight of what she was carrying, and she found she didn't mind the indifference. It made space. In the space, she could think about what she actually knew how to do and what she was willing to do with it, and what those two things, aligned correctly, might look like from the outside. She thought something different. She didn't know the shape yet, but she was walking toward it, and that was enough. The October morning went on around her, cold, clear, the kind of light that showed everything as it was, and not as it wished to appear. And Mara Voss walked south through the city that had always been indifferent to individual stories, in a jacket that didn't fit, without a plan, which was the closest thing to freedom she had ever known. Behind her, somewhere in the Harrington Grand, the staff was resetting the ballroom again. The chandeliers would come up. The tables would be dressed. The flowers would arrive. The glasses would be lined up at the bar, clean and clear and full of whatever the evening brought to them. And somewhere in the city, a man in a dark suit was beginning the long, careful work of building something that belonged entirely to itself. No outside capital, no leveraged architecture, no carefully positioned advisor with a plan that had always been someone else's plan. Just the work, and the territory, and the weight of knowing exactly who and what you were. The beginning of that was enough. Everything else was what came after.